Titans, KGO Radio. Tim Ferriss is in the studio. I love the description. You're a cross somewhere between Jack Welch and a Buddhist monk. I've interviewed Jack Welch a bunch of times. I never interviewed a Buddhist monk.
I think it's the lack of hair.
Is that what it is?
I think it's that I don't have any hair on top left, and I'm growing out some facial hair for the first time. I think that's probably what pegged it.
You have a book that is the size of, I guess, a Neiman Marcus catalog. And in there, you've got all these different people answering questions that are off the wall. What came up? How'd you come up with this idea?
I didn't plan on writing this book. I had a really difficult and intense 2017. I think, like a lot of people, had a number of close friends pass away, and not to make it too heavy too fast, but that's just part of the life cycle. But it happened in a really condensed period of time. So I wanted to just take a step back and reassess a lot of what was happening in my life, the direction, my priorities, and so on. And realized over the last few years of doing my podcast that I had access to a lot of people I would like to ask these questions that were floating around in my head. So that's exactly what I did. I took 11 questions that were top of mind and reached out to 130, 140 people who were the best at what they did. And that started with reaching out to 2 or 3. And once I started getting their answers, I thought to myself, I should just compile these and make it into a book, because some of the answers were so good, so helpful for me. And that's how it came to be.
Laura?
And you had just written Tools of the Titans, and actually that was his Father's Day present.
Oh, wow.
It was. That's what he got, and I have it for myself, and I gave a copy to my mom as well. So,
thank you.
Yes, absolutely. So this book is very different than Tools of the Titans, in that these are not people that you necessarily have interviewed on your podcast. But what are the other differences?
Yeah, so you named one for sure, in the sense that most of them, actually almost all of them, have not been on the podcast, including some people who I think would be very difficult to get on the podcast at all. For instance, people who had been demigods to me growing up, like Coach Dan Gable from Iowa, who's arguably the most legendary wrestler and coach, perhaps of any sport, if you look at the win-loss records of the last 50, 100 years. And people like Temple Grandin, for instance, who are just masterful on the keyboard, but audio would not be a native element for her, given that she has autism but is an expert in animal behavior and so on. The ability to dig in on the keyboard is amazing. Other differences would be the pattern matching. So Tools of Titans was really a highlight reel in my commentary on different episodes of the podcast. In this case, I'm asking everyone, or I'm offering them the same 11 questions, so you start to see patterns in morning routines, in the books that they've gifted most to other people, and so on. So that, I think, is very, very helpful for people who are trying to pick and choose their own habits or tools that they want to adopt, say, in the new year.
And as I was flipping through the book, I was noticing that I would kind of pick one question and flip through and see how people answered that one question. And it's great because you can open it at any time and you don't need to read it in a big chunk.
Yeah, that's, I think, an important point. And actually,
bathroom reading.
What was that? Yeah, it is
some big bathroom reading.
It is. It's bathroom or coffee reading. You sit down with a cup of coffee, and it's more like a choose your own adventure book, not intended to be read A to Z at all. And in fact, random piece of trivia that folks may not know, the Choose Your Own Adventure book series was created next door to my house by my neighbor when I was growing up. So I had a chance to prototype test these books when I was a kid, and Ed Packard, the writer, would reward us by putting my brother and I, our names into these books. So if you go back and find like used Choose Your Own Adventure books, every once in a while it'll say so-and-so Tim Ferriss was running from a Tyrannosaurus Rex. But very bite-sized profiles.
You've been able to talk to so many people in the course of your career and learn from the best of the best. What do you think that you still need to learn yourself but maybe don't admit to most people?
That's a good one.
That's a great question.
That is a good one. I would say, and this has become very clear in the last, 6 months in particular. We might not have time to fully unpack this and psychoanalyze it, but it's very difficult to, or if not impossible, I think it's impossible to fully love the people you care most about if you have gone through most of your life merely tolerating yourself or being very brutal and merciless in your self-talk. And I've had a very difficult, I had some very difficult periods when I was a kid, certainly not because of my parents. My parents are fantastic. And there's a lot of baggage that I haven't cleaned up and that I compartmentalized, and instead of trying to address any of that, which I think was the right call at the time, I just developed myself into this instrument of competition, whether it was in wrestling or in business and investing, whatever it might be. And I've come to realize in the last 6 months that the skill I most need to develop is more consistent self-love. As much as that would make my 20-year-old self vomit on his shoes, I really think that is not an indulgence. It is not an optional. It's not a nice to have. It is really a must have.
Is it self-love or self-acceptance?
It's both. It's both, and I think it's also perhaps self-forgiveness. So I think all three perhaps go together. And I found this practice, which was originally introduced to me by Chade Meng Tan, who's an early engineer at Google, and created a course called Search Inside Yourself, which was a mindfulness course, among other things, became the most popular course at Google, 6-month waiting list, I think, called Metta Meditation, METTA, or Loving Kindness Meditation. And very, very simple. People could actually try it, which is, in his description, you might take 5 minutes before dinner, before you go to bed, and think about 1 or 2 people who are friends of yours who helped you throughout your life and wish them happiness. That's it. That's all you have to do. There's no special technique. Just sit there and think of willing happiness and joy and lack of pain and suffering to these people. And what many people notice when they do this, even for a week, is that their own mood really improves dramatically, and they start to develop the ability to then say at a later point, wish that to earlier versions of themselves. And I don't want to get too esoteric, although we are in San Francisco after all. But that is what I most need to work on. And I think that's what a lot of people need to work on. So that would be it.
What I like is commonality. You look for all these different people and you see what is it that they have in common. Interestingly enough, it was the meditation part that most of them seem to allude to.
Oh, definitely. And by far and away the most obvious pattern when you look through the answers, I'd say 85 to 90% of people in the book have, whether early or late, mostly late, developed a habit of morning meditative practice. And for those who hear that and are immediately repulsed, as I was for decades, thinking, that's for people who play the didgeridoo and have dreadlocks and hang out in Dolores Park all day. That's not quite for me.
Well, you got the dreadlocks.
I'm definitely working on the dreadlocks on the chin at the very least. And I would say that you can think of it as emotional non-reactivity training. And that is just to say that instead of constantly being swept up as an actor in these movies that are playing in your head, you can step back and sit in the audience and observe the emotions and the stories that you're telling yourself so that you can choose your response, so that you're not as hair-triggered throughout the day.
This is something that meditation is something that I know my dad and I have both tried to do with Headspace, and we'll get through maybe the first 3 out of 10 days, and the intention is there, and we've encouraged each other to keep going, and it's just really hard to do, even though it's 10 minutes a day. That doesn't seem like that much time, but, for whatever the reason, it's hard to make that change. So how do you get yourself to stay committed?
Yeah, so there are a few, this is very common. There are a few suggestions I would make. Number one is lower the bar until it's not hard.
Oh, I heard you talk about this with flossing, making a change in general.
Right, with flossing or any other behavior that you're having a tough time adopting. So for instance, Chade would say 1 breath a day. Just 1 breath, 1 mindful breath, and you've meditated for the day. So make it so ridiculously low that the threshold is really easy to pass, first and foremost.
Tim Ferriss's book is Tribe of Mentors, but I'm lying. It's actually by Timothy Ferriss. Had to say that. And by the way, Laura, thanks for busting me. It's 10:42. Ronn Owens, Laura Owens, Tim Ferriss, KGO.